What's up guys, this is the first video on a brand new channel that I have created specifically to post videos about whatever interests me. Mostly video games or old tech stuff, things like that. Starting with this thing, the ODV-GBS-C scan converter. Now I wanted to make a video about this device because I find the English language documentation for it to be extremely lacking, and I'm hoping to fix that. Also, if you're wondering why mine has this toggle switch on the top that is not in the product photos, I'll explain that a little later when I get into modding this thing. So backing up for a minute, what even is this device? Simply put, it's a low-cost analog to analog/digital video converter/upscaler. Okay, maybe that wasn't that simple. Basically, it takes in the analog video signal from something like an old game console or computer and spits it out over HDMI and VGA so that you can use it with a computer monitor or any other modern display. The ODV-GBS-C is in the same product category as devices like the RetroTink 5X and open source scan converter, though it's cheaper than either of those options, typically selling online for around $100 US, compared to the $150 to $200 an OSSC usually costs, or the $250 and up you'll be paying for a RetroTink device. Unlike those other products, however, this scaler is not an original design. This is a modified clone of a much older analog video scaler called the GBS-8200. There's an open source mod for the GBS-8200 called GBS-Control, or GBS-C for short. This mod uses an off-the-shelf Arduino microcontroller to drastically improve the scaler's performance and add other modern functionality. The channel RetroRGB made a great video covering this project that I'll link in the description. What this device is, then, is a size-reduced clone of the GBS-8200 scaler that has the GBS-C modifications built into it from the factory. There are a few other GBS-C clones you can get, but this one from ODV is by far the most common and is usually the cheapest online. If you type GBS-C into Amazon or eBay, most of the results will be for this device. Hi, quick update from the future. So that statement was true back when I first bought this scaler last year, but it seems that in the time since then, this orange ODV scaler has been largely supplanted in online store listings by a couple of different newer and cheaper GBS-C clones. There are still plenty of these out there if you want to buy one, it's just no longer going to be the first 5 to 10 results you'll see in any given search. Now back to the video. The first thing that stands out about this unit, aside from the color, is the form factor. Most video converter and scaler boxes either have an input side and an output side located opposite each other, so that they can be placed in line with video cables. Or they have all their inputs and outputs on the rear, so they can be cleanly installed in a cabinet or entertainment center. The ODV-GBS-C doesn't adhere to either of these designs. Instead, it has connectors on all 4 sides of the unit, and the controls and display positioned on the top. That means there isn't really a good way to install this device in most conventional entertainment setups. I ended up putting Velcro strips on the bottom of mine so that I could attach it to the side of this hi-fi cabinet. This is probably the best way to install this scaler in most instances. This design would really benefit from having built-in wall mounting hooks on the bottom like you see on a lot of routers. Now I'm actually going to skip over most aspects of this device when it comes to regular usage, because it's basically the same as any other GBS-C scaler in that regard, and other people have already covered those in far greater depth than I ever could. There are a few things that I'm pretty sure are specific to this variant though that I want to call attention to. For one, the HDMI signal this scaler outputs is not super compatible, at least with my TV, which is an LG UP80 series. I assume other LG smart TVs are similarly affected as well. Scaling or moving the image too much causes it to lose signal, which is frustrating because the image scaling interface is one of the better designed features of the GBS-C, and I can't make full use of it with this TV. Though even outside of that admittedly pretty major issue, I still find this scaler to be a bit lacking. It's missing some configuration options found on other similar devices, most notably color correction. The self-hosted web interface you have to use to configure it offers a lot of flexibility, but I find having to load up a web page on my phone just to do something like switch scaling profiles to be extremely slow and inconvenient compared to just hitting a button on a remote. This issue is further compounded by the scaler's slow and sometimes flaky Wi-Fi connection. Don't get me wrong, the ODV-GBS-C is much better than most of the cheap, no-name video scalers you can buy online, but I really can't recommend it when the OSS-C costs about $60 more and is so much better in almost every way. Also, for some reason, the official compatibility chart on the ODV website claims that this scaler only works with European versions of the Wii and GameCube. I have no idea why. I have North American versions of both consoles, and they both work fine with it. Even with all that said, the fact remains that the ODV-GBS-C has lived in my entertainment center for the past 7 months, and I use it regularly without issue. But that is only because I'm not using it as an upscaler. The one area where GBS-C scalers excel, okay, actually there's 2 areas, the other's downscaling, but I'm not going to get into that here. Anyway, the one area where GBS-C scalers excel as far as I'm concerned, compared to anything else in their price range, is de-interlacing. Interlaced video content has to be de-interlaced before it can be showed on a progressive scan display, which tends to add input lag. This applies to things like VHS, a lot of old DVD titles, and any PS2, Xbox, GameCube, or Wii games that don't have a progressive scan option. If you want to view any of those things on a modern display, then a GBS-C scaler is probably the best bang for your buck. The de-interlacing looks as good as I've ever seen on any TV, and it doesn't add any perceptible input lag. The catch is that for optimal results, the GBS-C needs to be used in conjunction with something else. In my case, I have it paired with an open source scan converter. The component video signals from all of those previously mentioned consoles get fed from my receiver into the ODV-GBS-C. The video signals are not scaled, only de-interlaced, then a standard definition progressive scan signal is sent from the ODV's VGA output to my OSS-C. That's right, I'm not even using the HDMI on this thing. The OSS-C does all the necessary upscaling, color correction, and aspect ratio adjustments, then outputs it over HDMI with a signal that is much more compatible with my TV. The other nice thing about this setup is that the GBS-C will just pass through any progressive scan signals it gets straight through to the OSS-C without doing anything to them. If you're wondering why I even bother with this and don't just use the OSS-C's built-in de-interlacing, it's because the OSS-C uses Bob de-interlacing, which looks really awful and jittery. Hopefully you can see that in this side-by-side comparison, though it doesn't come through the best in my video capture. Trust me when I say the raw OSS-C output looks much worse in person. Of course, the total cost of this scaler plus an OSS-C is close to that of a RetroTink 5X, which has its own built-in de-interlacing that's much better than the OSS-C's. So I'd say just go with that if you're okay spending over $200 on a scaler. But if you already have one of these 2 devices, then the other one could make for a nice little upgrade depending on your setup. Now the fun part of this video, where I get to show you guys the modifications I've made to this scaler. Both of these mods require opening up the device, which isn't too difficult. Just remove the 4 Phillips head screws located under the feet, and lift everything off from the bottom half of the casing. The first mod is pretty straightforward and concerns these 3 dials, which control the saturation level of the red, green, and blue color channels respectively. These dials only affect the color output of the VGA signal, and they're a holdover from the original GBS-8200. I'm not even sure why they're here, as the GBS-C wiki recommends shorting these dials on the original 8200 so that the signal is always at full saturation. I did the same thing on my ODV unit, and it works great. The contacts you need to bridge are located on the underside of the PCB in this area. Here's a close-up with the points you need to solder highlighted. It takes just a little bit of solder to join each one together. I'd consider this to be an essential mod if you plan on using the VGA output like I am. The other modification I've made could come in handy for anyone, but it is 100% necessary if you plan on doing any development or hacking of the GBS-C firmware on this device. Even if you're not doing that, you'll probably still want to update the firmware on this scaler, as the version it comes with from the factory is very out of date. Updating requires using the Arduino IDE on a computer to compile and flash the new firmware. A full guide on how to do that will be linked down in the description. By default, the only way to upgrade or replace the firmware on this particular GBS-C variant is to upload it to the Arduino controller over Wi-Fi. This works fine until it doesn't. If the firmware fails to install or has a bug that causes it to not boot, then the scaler is bricked and you are screwed because you can't upload new firmware to it. The only way to fix this is to put the controller into flash mode, which requires you to open up the device by carefully removing the top half and locating the ESP8266 Arduino module on the board. Then it's a matter of finding the GPIO 0 pin on the chip and shorting it to ground. This will put the controller into flash mode the next time it boots, and you'll be able to upload new firmware to it over USB. I'm actually not sure if the USB port on this thing does anything normally, but it's a lifesaver if you end up bricking your scaler. Also, in case you hadn't figured it out, that toggle switch I mentioned earlier is wired up to the GPIO 0 pin so that I can just flip a switch to short it and don't have to take the whole scaler apart if I ever brick it again. And that's pretty much it for this video. I hope you're now a bit better informed on what you're getting into if you were considering buying one of these, and if you already have one, hopefully now you can get at least a little bit more out of it.